Welcome to the CHC podcast. This is a ministry of the Christian Heritage Center. Our mission at the Christian Heritage Center is to honor, preserve, and learn from the heritage of godly figures in the past to better serve the church today. My name is Kyle Kirby. I am the founder of the CHC, and I'm also the pastor for preaching at Grace Fellowship Church in Albion, Illinois. Today, I have the great pleasure to be joined by Pastor Keith Foskey. Together, we're going to reflect on how the study of church history and the lives of faithful believers in the past shape our faith and influence us, and how the Lord continues to use them in our lives. So, brother, before I go any further, I just want to say thank you so much for being a part of this and giving your time, and thank you.
Well, you're welcome, and thank you for inviting me on. Church history is one of my favorite subjects, so I look forward to the conversation.
Well, I'm very, very grateful for your participation. So we'll cover really three sections in this. We'll just kind of have you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your background, and then how you got introduced to church history, and then we'll talk about the influence of historical figures on your life briefly, and then lastly we'll just touch on the value of historic awareness as Christian believers. And then I thought it'd be kind of fun. I've never done this before, Keith, but I thought it'd be kind of fun if we did a quick fire round at the end, just asking you some quick questions, and then we'll close and so forth. So does that sound good to you, brother?
Sounds wonderful.
All right.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. So, Keith, for those who may not know you, could you share a little bit about your background and your pastoral work, and so who you are and what you do? Share as little or as much as you like.
Sure. Well, I am pastor of Sovereign Grace Family Church. I serve with two other pastors. We make up the elders there at Sovereign Grace, and I'm the one who does the majority of the preaching. So I guess I'm the pastor of preaching, as you said earlier. That was the position you hold. And I have been in ministry at this church. January will be 20 years that I will have been in the position that I'm in now. And through those years, I have really enjoyed not only learning about the history of our denomination, which we are Baptists, but also learning about the history of the church in general. And back in 2018, we started something called Sovereign Grace Academy. Sovereign Grace Academy is a 2-year ministry training program that we provide free of charge to anyone who wants to take the courses, and they're all available online. And one of the courses that I was able to teach was courses in church history. And we've got a overview of church history, the 2,000 years at a glance, we call it. And then we do individual specific portions, like I've done early church history, as well as teaching on how we got the Bible, which is a specific subset of church history and apologetics. How we know that what we have is actually what was written by the apostles and prophets. So those are areas that I think are very important and often neglected in the modern church. And so it's been a delight as to have that part of my ministry be able to pursue those things.
Now, do people have to be members of your church to be a part of that academy, Keith?
No, we offer online, and it's like I said, it's no cost. It started out actually as I graduated from Jacksonville Baptist Theological Seminary, which is in my hometown of Jacksonville, Florida. And it started out because I had my doctorate through them. I offered to teach classes at our church that local students could take as like adjunct classes. They could come, or not adjunct, but like off-campus courses. They could come take a course with us, and it would qualify for credit. And that was my original purpose behind it. But then that sort of, I found out that more lay people wanted to take classes. And so now we actually identify ourselves. We call it Sovereign Grace Academy. a seminary for everyone. That's in fact, that's our email address, seminary for
I
everyone
like that.
at gmail.com.
That's great.
So it's people who come still have to do the work. They still have
Hmm.
to read the books. They have to write the papers and all those things. I structured it around the same classes I took when I was in
Hmm.
seminary. A little bit different level, but still the same type
Hmm.
of material. And people tend to enjoy it, and people can go there right now and earn certificates. They're not accredited, and
Mm.
we say that up front. It's not an accredited institution, but if people want to take courses and earn certificates that they can put on their, people use them, they put them on
Mm.
their what's that thing called, LinkedIn. On
Oh,
LinkedIn
they're
you
like
can
the
say,
resume, LinkedIn's,
yeah, and they can
something
say,
like that.
they've taken these courses in these subjects. So yeah.
Man, that's wonderful. That's such an encouraging thing to hear, especially with the church history and so forth. Because I think a lot of people, especially in a lot of seminary things, people get this idea that that's stuff for seminarians, that's stuff for the academic world, but doesn't really have a place for the pew.
That's right.
And so that's great to see um, that you're trying to bridge those two things, and so that's so wonderful. So it sounds like as a result of some of that, you're probably regularly studying and actively involved in being familiar with the material and so forth. So that kind of leads us into another, like, what does your involvement with church history look like right now? So, like, what does your appreciation of it currently look like?
Well, right now, the major area that tends to be being discussed is particularly first millennial church history, and even further back into what we might say early church history.
Mm.
Church history, of course, as I teach it, it tends to break into three subsections, which are the first 500 years, that is early church history, and then the next 1,000 years, which is medieval church history, and then of course the last 500 years is post-reformational church history. And so as of right now, a big focus and push is on early church history going into the medieval period. I'm going to be teaching a
Mm.
medieval church history course next year in Myrtle Beach. I'm doing a whole week where I'm going up. The church is flying me up to come and teach on medieval church history. So that's on my plate.
Mm.
But the reason for the looking at the first millennium and examining that is because of many of the claims that are being made, particularly by Roman Catholic apologists and
Mm.
Eastern Orthodox apologists, are claiming to have historic veracity in their practices, which don't appear to be biblical to
Hmm.
many of us, and especially from a Baptist perspective, many of them that seem actually counter biblical.
Mm.
And so by going back and seeing where did these things develop, where did these additions creep in
Yeah.
to the history of the church, when did people actually start praying the rosary? I'm
Mm.
certain none of the apostles carried around a rosary. I mean, I'm absolutely certain that that didn't happen, but it came in at some point.
Yeah.
And I don't believe the apostles practiced infant baptism, but
Hmm.
that came in at some point.
Yep.
Now, that one's a hot button because you and I probably both have a lot of friends who are Presbyterian.
Yep.
But you're Baptist, am I right?
Correct. I'm a Reformed Baptist.
Am I allowed to say that? I don't know if I want to out you as a Baptist. Is
I am a Protestant. I am a Reformed Baptist. That's great.
okay. Well, that
Uh,
particular question,
mm,
even by the time of Constantine,
yeah.
there was debate about baptism and how it should be administered. Constantine himself wasn't even baptized until late in his life because the belief was that after baptism, sins only were
Mm.
forgiven, the only previous sins were forgiven
Mm.
when you were baptized. And so people would put off their baptisms until death,
Hmm.
and or until right before they died, right? This was to sort of cover their bases. And that kind of thinking, while it may have been unique to a geographic area or unique to a specific strain, is
Hmm.
indicative of the fact that there wasn't as much uniformity
Mm.
as often is claimed, especially
Yeah.
in the more institutional churches such as Rome and Eastern Orthodoxy.
Mm.
You'll
Yeah.
hear the claim today. They'll say, "Well, all the church fathers agreed on X, and whatever X is." And my research has been no, that's not exactly the case. I mean,
Yeah,
you can make them sound like they agree if you're only using
that's right.
specific quotes, but there seems to be a lot of areas where there were at least recognition of differences among them. Some of them even would later be counted as heretics today,
Hmm.
of the things that they were teaching. I don't mean to keep going on about this,
No.
but one other quick thing. I was in a debate. I was not participating in the debate. I was in the audience, but I was in a debate 2 months ago with James White and Dale Tuggy on the subject of the Trinity.
Mm,
And I don't know if you know who Dale Tuggy is, but Dale Tuggy is
mm,
probably one of the leading Unitarian
mm,
advocates out there right now. He advocates for a Unitarian view of the Trinity, which is obviously unbiblical
mm,
and I would say very dangerous and heretical.
hmm,
But Dale Tuggy, using quotes from the early church, primarily ante-Nicene quotes, those which came before
mm,
325, and he was saying, "See, this guy didn't believe in the Trinity, and this guy didn't believe in the Trinity. Look what this guy says here, and look what this
yeah,
guy says here." And I was sitting there watching. I was saying the same thing he's doing
yeah,
is the same thing that so many others do, where they cherry pick the quotes
that's right.
to argue for their position. So I think that's one of the reasons why we have to study history and not just try to enforce our own biases, but actually
Yeah,
try to see what history does teach us.
yeah. I think that's such a good point because, like, everything you're talking about, you can't do like it's hard to do effective apologetic work without doing good historical work.
Yes.
And so, yeah. And, as you're saying that, Keith, I think about some of the church fathers and how many of them wrote prolifically,
Mhm.
like just volume after volume after volume. Not all of them, but so many of them wrote prolifically. And so it's like, if somebody's definitively claiming this is what they believed on a subject, um, it's like, have you read
Yeah.
everything they wrote?
Yeah.
Because there's a lot. Origin wrote a lot.
Yeah.
These guys, some of them, it's amazing. I'm like, how in the world did these guys write so much stuff? But yeah, that's great. Yeah, great reason to study these things. When was the first time you really got introduced to church history, Keith? Was
Well,
it
this is
college or?
no, no. I will say this: church history was not a big part of my seminary experience, which is
Mm,
sad to say. I've actually offered to our seminary to come back and teach courses, and there that may materialize at some point in the future. But I mean, we had sort of standard things that we
mm,
would study. But it wasn't in depth. I tell you the first course I ever took that was really meaningful, and it's my favorite pastor in the world. I don't know if you know this man, but do you know Brian Borgman?
hmm. I don't know him
Bri
personally. Uh,
Brian is a dear friend, and he's pastor of, Grace Community Church in Mendon, Nevada, where he has served for many, many, many years. And Brian, I was introduced to him because I wanted to take a course in church history, and I was looking through sermon audio,
mm,
which used to be, I mean, everybody was on sermon audio. It's not
yeah.
as popular as it once was, but Brian had an entire series that he had done teaching church history,
Mm,
and I drank it like it was sweet tea, man. I just
yeah.
drank it like I'm
Uh,
actually on low carb right now, so I can't have sweet
oh
tea. So I
no,
can
it's
I can
Christmas
pretend
time,
I can
man.
pretend. Well, Thanksgiving I won't be on low carb
Uh,
next week.
uh,
But no, I loved it, and he was so good. He talked about Charlemagne and all the things that
mm,
happened in the Middle Ages. It was so neat and so interesting, and that probably would have been around 2008.
mm,
So we're talking many, many years ago. But because I know I was actually working as a substitute teacher when I first started preaching. I had a part-time job as a
mm-hmm,
substitute teacher, so 2 days a week I would go in and substitute, and I would listen to his his audio teaching on my way to and from the school. That's how I remember this.
Mm,
And I must have listened to that for weeks and weeks and weeks. He had so much good material.
yeah.
And that really showed me the importance of church history. But I also want to give the shout out to another person, and that is I
Mm,
mentioned James White earlier.
mhm,
James White has been a mentor in my life and a teacher. And again, I've known him now for 20 years and have spent many hours just studying his material and also having the blessing of being able to be
mm,
his friend and talk to him and things. But I mention him only because it was his use of church history and apologetics that
mm,
showed me how important it was.
mhm,
Because if we're going to defend the faith, we ought to be able to define the faith historically as well as we do biblically.
mm. Yeah, that's so good. Well, and you think about so much of church history, that's the very thing they were doing.
Yep.
They were crystallizing their beliefs to protect and to define and explain and articulate orthodoxy.
Yes.
And so it's like they were being forced to do so. And so we should seek to do the same thing in a sense, to know what it is we believe, so that we can rightly defend and stand firm and fight for the faith. So yeah, yeah, that's really neat. I didn't know that about Brian Borgman. I didn't know he had that. I wonder if it's still available.
I think so. I think it was on Sermon Audio. I think if someone wants to go and look up that, it would probably be available.
Mm. So Keith, everything I'm hearing you say, the church history and historical theology and so forth is not some pie in the sky conceptual ideology that should be on a shelf. Everything I'm hearing you say is that it's actually useful in your life, and that is practical for your life. Um, how do you see church history as practical in the Christian life, and not just theoretical and academic?
I I like to use this example, and anybody who's heard me teach on church history will have heard this before, but since we're new friends, you haven't heard me say it. But there, Charles Schulz, who wrote the Peanuts cartoons,
Hmm.
had a really good cartoon, and it was I think it was Linus and his sister who were in the frame, and his sister was writing, and Linus comes up to her and says, "What are you writing?" And she says, "I'm writing a paper on church history." And he goes, "Oh, okay." And he walks away. And then it shows what she's writing. And it starts with, "My pastor was born in 1935." That was the joke, was her
Mm,
idea of church history was it started when my pastor was born. That's when church history started, right? My
hmm,
pastor was born in 1935. And I always thought that was very insightful
hmm.
of Schultz to recognize that most people don't have a view past their own generation,
Yeah.
both before or after. And I think
Yep.
you and I talked about this before we started recording. But the problem with so many people is we become so myopic, both historically
Mm,
and culturally, and recognizing, number one, we didn't start this thing.
yeah.
There have been brothers and sisters who've come before us, and we're probably not the end. I mean, Jesus may return in our lifetime, but we're probably not the tip of the spear,
Hmm.
right? Like we're probably somewhere in the shank,
Hmm.
waiting for the tip of the spear when Christ returns. And
Yeah.
so I think the practical implication is, one, asking this question, and this is huge,
Mm,
is what we are doing as Christians, is it absolutely different than what
mm,
our ancestors who were practicing the same faith,
yeah.
is it absolutely different than what they were doing?
Hmm.
And this is where we as Baptists, we have to struggle sometimes because people will say, well, no one was baptizing believers only until, the 1600s
Hmm.
or the 1500s rather, with the rise of the Anabaptist movement and things like that. And that claim is there. And so we have to give a defense for
Hmm.
why we would practice a believers only or credo baptism practice when it hasn't been the majority report of the
Yep.
church. I've done debate on this. I've done interacting with Presbyterians and Lutherans on this subject because uh, I do think that's a legitimate question.
Hmm.
Why are you doing it differently than the majority of your ancestors? I think we have a good answer,
Yeah.
but at the same time, I do think this is where history comes into play because if we don't recognize that we're not the only ones who've ever done this, then I think we can get very arrogant and very
Hmm.
prideful in our practice.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that shows a good true humility, and that you're willing to examine what history says about this subject, and then
Yes.
compare it next to Scripture. It's very arrogant to say, "Well, I got this right on my own. I figured this out. This is what the Bible teaches. I don't need to ask anybody else.
Yeah.
I don't need to look anywhere else." Um, so yeah, novelty is not typically a good thing
That's
in
right.
the life of the church and Christianity. Uh,
Novelty has no place in theology. That's
yeah,
typically the way I would say. Yeah, when somebody comes up and says, I see something in this text that no one has ever seen before me," I'm like, "Slow down, Scooter.
yeah,
That's a dangerous that's a dangerous place to be."
yeah. That's right. I think that American individualism has contributed to this as well. This idea that well, we're kind of like we're it. And
Yeah.
so, uh, and we forget what is behind us. We forget what is around us, even in the world and around the globe in Christianity and taking place in other continents and other nations. And we forget about what's ahead of us. We think, well, this is my local church and this it, forgetting that there's a long line of godly men behind us, and there's a long line of history and doctrine uh, that we ought to be connected to and have continuity with a great degree. Yeah, such a good point. So, Ch- Keith, thinking about church history and your time studying it, and uh, that time with Borgman and James White, and just teaching, preparing. Is there one figure that stands out in church history that you say, that is my dead mentor? That is the guy that teaches me more than anything else. Or maybe I just have an affinity for this person more than anybody else. And why?
I am a very big uh proponent, not proponent. I'm a bit I don't like to use the word fan, so I would just say Luther has been such an influence on me in many
Mm,
ways, and I have studied his life probably more than any one other figure you would
mm,
think because I'm a Calvinist that it would be Calvin, but I'm actually less interested in Calvin.
mm-hmm,
I'm more interested in Luther, and Zwingli is close because
mm,
he's also such an interesting figure. But the magisterial reformers have been a huge subject of study. But every year I'm asked at some point to give my teaching on the life of Luther, and so
mm.
this year I did it actually 3 times in a row because I did it
Oh,
at
praise God.
I did it in Kentucky, I did
Mm,
it in Winter Haven, and then I did it at our church on a Sunday morning because it was Reformation
mm,
Sunday. And so, in the years past, I've done it at chapels and stuff where I'll go in and just give a 30-minute rendition of the
mm,
life of Luther, walking from his early childhood and growing up,
mhm,
and the situation with the lightning bolts, and being led into the monastery, and then
mm,
from the monastery to his time in as the professor of theology at Wittenberg, and the things that happened after the posting of
mm,
the 95 Theses and on into the Diet of Worms. So all of those things, I just sort of walk through his life and I see the sort of the key moments where he was
mm,
faced with the option to simply give up or to
mm,
recant and to say, you know what? I mean, he was standing in the shadow of Jan Hus, who
mm,
lived 100 years, who was burned at the stake 100 years before Luther, and he knew what he knew the potential
mhm,
of what could happen.
Mhm.
when he refused to recant. And even though he had Frederick the Wise and a few others who were on his side, as it were, willing to protect him, Jan Hus was promised protection too. But
Mm.
when he was deemed a heretic, it was, if you're a heretic, heretics don't deserve safe conduct.
Yeah.
You're out. And so those men really have had a tremendous influence on me. But it's different eras, right?
Yeah.
Because you go back and you go to Athanasius during the
Mhm.
time of Nicaea and following, and you have Athanasius contra mundum,
Mhm.
Athanasius against the world when he's fighting the Arian controversies, and and even against Constantius II, who was Constantine's son, who sided with the Arians. And then you have this tremendous amount of battle that's going on, and it does seem like the Trinitarians are going to lose,
Mhm.
uh, and yet God's truth prevails.
Yeah.
Right? Mighty Fortress is my favorite
Oh,
song.
yeah.
Luther wrote it, and just that, that we sing it often at our church, and every time
Mhm.
I sing it, I think about, just the powerful truths in that song about, did we in our own strength confide, our striving would be losing. We're not
Yeah.
the right man on our side, the man
Mm.
of God's own choosing. That those words, Luther couldn't have done it without Christ.
Mhm.
Athanasius couldn't have done it without Christ.
That's right.
And Jan Hus died singing to Christ.
Mhm.
He was burning, and yet he was singing a
Mm.
song to Christ. And I look forward to meeting him in glory
Mhm.
one day. So those are just a few. I know you had
Mm.
said for one, but
Oh,
Luther
no,
would
that's
bring it
right.
above the others just because I've spent more time studying his theology. I'm not Lutheran, but I appreciate Lutheran theology so
Mhm.
much. So
Yeah. Now, why do you think you have such a draw to Luther?
because he was, well, a couple things. One, I have struggled with anxiety in my
Mm.
life, especially as a young man. It was one of the things that God used to help me come to Him,
Mhm.
was genuine anxiety and depression that I had faced. And a lot
Mhm.
of people know me as being very happy and very jovial. I joke a lot. I actually do stand up comedy. So people, but I try to remind people, sometimes the funniest person in the room is often the person who's
Mm.
masking the most pain.
Mm.
Think of Robin Williams, right? Robin Williams
Mm.
was a hilarious individual who committed suicide. So I try to remind people, just because someone is happy on the outside doesn't mean they're happy on the inside.
Mm.
And so I look at the early life of Luther when he was struggling with the
Yeah.
righteousness of God and his own sin, and not being able to come up with a good reason for God to actually receive him.
Mhm.
I get it.
Yeah.
And so that's the draw for me, is Luther wasn't trying to reform the church.
Mhm.
At the beginning, he was trying to find comfort for his own soul. He
Mm.
was trying to find peace with God. And Romans 5:1, therefore, having been justified by faith, we have peace with God. That's
Mhm.
that's that's all he wanted.
Yeah.
And he couldn't find peace in the Roman system because there is no peace in Rome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ah, man. Yeah, that so my guy would be Lloyd Jones.
Oh, sure.
And
Yeah.
Lloyd Jones, he said, he made a comment similar to this. He said something similar to, you know, we have to believe the word. But we was talking about the righteousness of Christ. And so we confess our sin, we look to Christ and his righteousness, and then we believe the word of God, and we believe the truth that Christ is our righteousness, and we move on and we leave that sin behind us. And so I think about Luther and everything you're saying, brother. That was Luther constantly was teaching himself that. He was constantly preaching to himself that Christ is our righteousness. Well, all the interactions and the the discourse that he had in spiritual warfare with the devil.
Mhm.
Um, go ahead. I'm nothing.
Yeah.
There's not my. I am nothing. Wear yourself out. Exhaust yourself. My righteousness is bound completely up in Christ.
That's right.
And so it's like there's so much encouragement and learning from the example of these men who struggled with the same struggles we have, the difficulties that we have in different contexts and settings. Um, but that that's encouraging to hear, and so much usefulness in studying these figures and their lives. Um, so, for our listeners, how do you, when you think about, say, Luther or Zwingli or any of these other men, it's important to honor these men. I That's
Mhm.
one of the reasons that our ministry exists, is to honor these men. But it's also important that we at the same time recognize their flaws, because we know that Christ alone is righteous. So, like, how would you explain that to someone, brother? We need to honor these men. We need to recognize them for what they've done, and rejoice how the Lord has used them. But we don't want to worship these men.
Oh
We
yeah.
don't want to whitewash them. How would you explain that to someone, Keith?
First of all, I always try to remind people, because this question actually came up
Mm.
this year, because in preparation for Reformation Sunday, we had a Wednesday night dinner. We actually had a German feast. That's a
Oh, that's
little,
neat.
and we had a Q&A with the elders where it was,
Mm,
the theme was the Reformation.
mm,
And one of the questions was, hey, isn't there questions about Luther's later life, some of the things that he wrote, specifically what he wrote about the
mm,
Jews, and is the anti-Semitic nature of Luther later in his life
mm,
indicative of a reason why we shouldn't take into account what he has to say? And my response was, there are many things that
mm,
Luther said, even
mm.
not those things, there are other things that he said
Yeah.
that I would disagree with. I hate the fact that he and Zwingli could not come together at the
Mm,
Marburg Colloquy, because it was one division, the division over the presence of Christ in the supper. And that particular division breaks my heart, because there was an opportunity
hmm.
there for genuine unity to
Yeah.
come out of the Reformation, and yet they weren't able to unify. And uh, R.C. Sproul is one of my favorite
Mm,
preachers, more contemporary, of course, preacher. His mentor was John Gerstner, and John Gerstner taught a history course, and he was teaching on the Marburg Colloquy, and he
mm,
called it the saddest moment in the Reformation.
yeah.
He said, because you had an opportunity for unity that was spoiled by one point of doctrine.
Mm,
And I think that's genuinely how I would feel, is that that's sad to me.
hmm,
So having said that, when I look at the question of how do I how do I contextualize Luther or Calvin? I mean, you have
hmm.
the death of Michael Servetus, right?
Yeah.
Which is often attributed to Calvin's bloodthirst and bloodlust, which I don't think was the case,
Hmm,
but is often attributed to that. And so, having one, we can't deny what history teaches. You
hmm,
can't just, like you said, you can't whitewash it and you can't ignore it, but you also don't make excuses for it. These
hmm.
are men, and we have a saying at our church that's, I guess it's not unique to our church, but we say it fairly often, and that is, a man at best is still a man at best.
Hmm.
A man at his best is still a man at best, right? Like there is no perfect man outside of Jesus Christ.
That's right.
And so we can look to Luther's failures and say there was an area he failed.
Hmm.
He stood strong at Worms, but he failed at, I think he failed at Marburg. I really do.
Mm,
I think there was a failure there. I, I can look at so many other men and say the same thing. So this is where we don't have to, as particularly Protestants and Baptists,
hmm,
we don't have to agree with all the things that men did to still
hmm,
hold them in high esteem. I mean, Calvin and Luther and Zwingli all opposed what they considered to be rebaptism, which you and I
hmm.
would just consider to be proper baptism or believer's baptism. And I know this podcast wasn't supposed to be about baptism, but but since we're both Baptists, we can't help it. But you understand, I mean,
Yeah.
there were men who were drowned
Hmm.
for their faith in
Mm,
believers' baptism, and the story of Michael and Margaretha Sattler
mm,
is one that, I mean, it breaks my heart
mm,
every time I tell that story. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but
I'm not.
they were Anabaptist leaders. And again, I'm not an Anabaptist, and I
Mm,
do disagree with mm, quite a bit of Anabaptist theology, but they were leaders in the Anabaptist movement. Michael was, of course, he was, Margaretha was his wife. And when they were captured, and I
mm,
don't remember who it was that captured them, but they were enemies of the state because they were violating the
mm,
state law, which was not baptizing infants and baptizing believers. That was against the law, if you can
yeah,
believe it. That was against
yeah.
the law. Michael Sattler he was burned at the stake after having had his eyes gouged out and his tongue removed. They put gunpowder in a sack and wrapped it around his neck so that when he went into
Mm,
the fire, it would literally explode. And it was such a horrid death. And his wife was in prison while it was happening, and the next day she was taken out and drowned.
mm,
There is no excuse for that.
yeah,
There is no way to defend that. I don't care
yeah.
who you are, I don't care what you believe. There's just no defense for people to do that in the name of Christ.
Hmm.
And so I look at that and I say, yes, we cannot whitewash history.
Yeah.
We have to be honest and say, yes, there have been horrible mistakes made
Hmm.
in the name of Jesus Christ. And no matter who made them, we don't
Yep.
need to try to uh, say that they were okay because our hero or
Hmm.
someone who we may have hold in high esteem were were part of that.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. There's so many sad, hard things. And I think that is, we have to look back and remember that these are men. Like you're
That's right.
saying, these are men that lived by faith. They had indwelling sin within them, and they were men of their. They were men. You can't get out of your age.
That's right.
You can't get out of the period in which you live. And so we might say, well, that's not me. I can see beyond that, but none of us can. We all live as men in the time in which we were born.
Yeah.
And so it's like we have to recognize their flaws. We have to praise God for their successes and their victories. Um, but ultimately, we have to recognize that there are men living by faith, and that Christ alone is their righteousness as believers. And
Amen.
because I think if we try to whitewash things, if we try to diminish the flaws and the failures of our heroes, even, then what we end up doing is we end up diminishing the righteousness of Christ. And we don't want to do that. Above all, we want to hold the name of Christ in high repute, and lift it higher than all other names.
Amen.
Um, so obviously, there's great importance in being aware and understanding and having um, some sort of consciousness about what's taken place in the past, and what men have done, what the church has believed. Um, do you think that many churches and ministers today, would you say that they suffer from a kind of historical amnesia, Keith?
I think it's almost amnesia might be the right word. But I would even say it is more on the sense of hubris,
Mm,
because it's historical hubris.
mm,
The people who came before me just don't know what I know, and
yep,
therefore I can't learn anything from them because I know so much more than they did.
yep,
That type of pride and arrogance, and we see that in every field, not just
yeah,
the church, but think of how often younger generations look to the older generations and they mock them
mm,
because they don't know how to use the latest technology or something like that. and
yeah,
and that sort of, I mean, my own son calls me a boomer. I'm like, I'm not a boomer, but he's 25 and I'm
yeah,
45, and I'm like, what are you talking about? But I guess I am old from his perspective.
hmm,
I got a little gray coming in now, and but that being said, I do think there's often is there's
hmm,
just a lack of appreciation for other generations.
yeah. Oh, I agree 100%. I
Yeah.
think that I would characterize what you're saying as Um, well, in one way, I characterize it as presentism. And
Hmm.
so, like, just because, I live now, all this modern technology, uh, they didn't have any of this stuff. They were so archaic back then.
Yeah.
Uh, I just know better. Uh, and arrogant. I'm trying to think. Carl Truman had a term for it. I can't remember what it was, but yeah, this hubris. But I think also like they said like what we've been talking about. Well, they're so complex and there's so many. They're so problematic. So I'm just going to completely write them off. I don't want anything to do with those. I can't even really say they were probably Christians if they believed that. And so we just kind of live isolated from the past and from tradition and historical theology. What dangers do you see coming out of that, Keith?
Well, it opens up, it really does open up people to be susceptible, to be easily led away by those who may have a little bit of knowledge of history, and
Hmm.
they can use that knowledge to cause people to look a different direction. And again,
Mm,
I don't want to seem like I'm beating up on, Roman Catholicism or Eastern Orthodoxy, but so much of the apologetics that's coming out of
mm,
Eastern Orthodoxy and Rome right now are those who are claiming to have the historical high ground.
mm,
And if somebody doesn't know anything about church history, it's easy to be caught up in that argument.
yeah,
It's easy to be uh, moved to
yeah,
say, well, don't you know that everyone in the first millennium believed that Jesus was present physically in the supper,
yeah.
right? Don't you know everybody believed that? Which is a bold claim, but
Hmm.
that is the claim.
Yeah.
And so are we not able to even have a conversation about what the different views of the table have been and how they have evolved and changed? I mean, even the idea of transubstantiation, that's a medieval
Mm,
doctrine. Now, the idea of Christ's
mm,
presence in the table is not a medieval doctrine. That goes back very early in the church. But the idea of transubstantiation, the physical elements changing in their substance but not in their accidents, was a medieval
mm,
doctrine. And in fact, uh, John Wycliffe,
mm,
who lived in the 1300s, he wrote against transubstantiation, and he wrote against it by claiming essentially it was new doctrine. He
mm,
said, "This is new doctrine." And from his perspective, it was, because it was only at that point maybe about 200 years old,
mhm,
as far as that language and how it was being formulated and understood. And so being able to engage historically, I think, is very helpful and will help people to not be as easily moved by what
yeah.
sounds like very articulate counter arguments from other
Mm.
positions.
Yeah, the deeper your roots, the less easily you're blown around. And you
That's right.
know,
I'll give you this. There's a very famous quote from a, a Roman
mm,
Catholic. I think he was a cardinal, but he was, I think it was John Henry Newman actually who said it, but I could be wrong. But basically said, the further you get into history, the least likely you're going to be a Protestant. The more deep you study history, the more likely you're going to become Catholic. That was his argument. The problem is, though, there's actually an inverse in that, because the
mm,
further you go back in history, you start seeing where the Catholic Church has added things,
yep,
and you start seeing these additions come along. Gavin Ortland in
yep,
his book talks about, he uses the word accretions, or
mm,
things that have been added in. And I tell people that if you think of a pipe, and like the pipe coming out of my kitchen that goes into our drain field,
mhm,
that pipe begins to pick up grease and grime and things
mhm,
as we wash dishes. It begins to The pipe gets smaller because of all these things on the side. And by the time of the Middle Ages and late Middle Ages, you have where there's so much that has
yeah.
been, so much accretion, so much addition that's come in. This is the Reformation was,
Oh,
it was
yeah.
roto-rooter, right? We got, and and did they do it 100% right? Was everything right? No. Luther still kept many of those things. Luther believed in many of the Marian
Mm,
dogmas that I would completely disagree with, such as the perpetual virginity of Mary and things like that.
mm,
Luther continued to believe those things because that wasn't the battle he was fighting,
yeah,
and he
yeah.
believed it was true. So, yeah.
Mm. Man, that's a great illustration. And I will give you credit, but I may use that one of these days
Oh, please,
just to
absolutely.
illustrate. That is,
Well, again, Gavin was the one who I learned the word accretion because in his book he must have used it 5,000 times. But and that's his book defending Protestantism, and it
mm.
was very useful, very useful. Yeah.
Brother. If for somebody starting out, where would you encourage them to begin in their study? Whether that be a book or what to do, how would you encourage them in that, and where would you point them?
Well, if you are a reader, then I would point you to two resources. One is one volume church history called Church History in Plain Language by Bruce Shelley. It's now in its fifth edition, and I am actually a bigger fan of the fourth edition, because the fifth edition has some things that were added after his death. Some of them goes into more modern
Mm,
practices and some things that there was just some things in the fifth edition that I'm not a huge fan of. But if you do get the fifth edition, it's still fine.
mm-hmm,
Just recognize that there are some things that have been added, and I actually think it was his daughter
mm,
that came in after him and added some things. But the fourth edition is what I used to teach from. That's actually the textbook I use in
okay.
my overview of 2,000 years of church history class, and it's Church History in Plain Language by Bruce Shelley. Is It's just it doesn't present the information from a Catholic or from an Orthodox or from a
Mm-hmm,
Protestant. It just says this is what happened,
yeah.
and it doesn't really attempt, at least from my perspective, having read it several times, it doesn't really attempt to make you be one or the other. Just this is
Mm-hmm,
what happened.
yeah.
The other one, if you want a more reformed resource, or not necessarily reformed, but one that would be uh, more closely aligned, I think, theologically with us, Nick Needham's
Mm-hmm,
2,000 Years of Christ's Power is a multi-volume set, and his early church history, I think, is the first 500 years, and then you've got the second volume, which is the Middle Ages. I'm going to be using that when I teach next year. That'll be probably the textbook that I use for
mm,
that course. And I think he has 4 volumes, if I remember correctly. But that's Nick Needham's set. Those are two books that I would point to.
mm,
Then, if you're not a reader, and not everybody is, I mean,
yeah.
some people are better at listening,
Mm-hmm.
and so I again, not to toot my own horn, but if you were interested in just listening to an eight part overview of church history, I have that available. If you just go to sovereigngraceacademy.org, and you can access it there, or go to Sermon Audio and look up my last name Foskey, and it'll bring you to all my sermons. And I have a series there. And of course, I would recommend Brian Borgman's before I would
Mm-hmm,
recommend mine, and we've already mentioned him. So that would be two audio series that you could
mm,
just listen to while driving, or something like that. So those would be two. And then last one, and I don't have you ever heard of the Christian History Institute?
mm-hmm.
Dr. Ken oh goodness, Ken Curtis, Dr. Ken Curtis. They have some great videos.
Yeah.
I use these for my kids.
Oh, I know where you're going with this.
Yeah, the Reformation overview videos are really good. I think they also put out some of the cartoon stuff for
The Torchlighters, maybe.
might be. I don't think they put out Torchlighters, but I think that they are. If you go to their website, you can access it through them.
Those are so good.
They are super good. We the Corey Ten Boom Torchlighters cartoon, dude, that make you cry, and it's a
I
cartoon.
know.
It,
You buy into it. You're
yeah,
enthralled.
it's really good. It's really good. And the story of Augustine, the Torchlighters on Augustine's life is really good as well. So all of those, I mean, just
Yeah.
learn whatever people learn in different ways.
Yeah.
I'm an audio guy. I actually have a program. It's
Mm.
called Speechify. I could sell this program if I were a salesman. I could totally sell this program, because what it does is it takes any document
Mm.
and it reads it to you in natural speech. It's an AI reader.
Mm,
And so, like, people will reach out to me and ask me to review their book,
mhm,
and I say, "Send me the PDF," and I listen to it on my way to the church. I have a 30-minute
mm,
drive to the church and a 30-minute drive home, and I go to the church almost
yeah,
every day. So it's an hour in the car.
yeah,
I would be wasting that time if I were just doing nothing.
yeah.
So I use that time to listen, and so, you can get through an audiobook in 2 weeks if
Oh,
you're
yeah,
getting an hour a day, a 10-hour audiobook. So if that's the way you learn, find out what's
yeah,
best for you and make it happen. Yeah,
yeah. Just figure out some way to start doing this in an enjoyable way. One thing I've found helpful in my own life is if I'm interested in something, just pursue that.
that's right.
Don't force something because there won't be any resilience or perseverance long term. But if you're interested in something, if you're motivated, and there's something in church history that you're fascinated by, lean into that, and you learn about a lot of other stuff indirectly.
Yeah,
I love the 18th century, and I love the Great Awakening. I love Grimshaw. I love Whitfield. I love all of those guys. I love studying the Wesleys, the preaching of that era. And you learn so much about the Reformation as a result of that, but also
sure.
the early missions movements. You there's there's so much interconnectivity, and brother, those were some wonderful recommendations. Thank you for sharing those. Keith, are you ready for a real quick fire round before we close?
Let's do it. Let's do it.
I've never done one of these before, so I'll just ask away. All right. Keith, what is your favorite church father?
Uh, Athanasius, I would say Athanasius.
Who is
Yeah,
your favorite reformer? We know this one.
Luther. Yeah, Luther.
Your favorite Puritan?
Ooh, that was a little tougher. Does Bunyan count?
Sure, we'll go with him.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
uh, who's your favorite historical preacher?
Ooh,
That's a hard one.
it is. Calvin, I think, just reading his commentaries,
Mm,
obviously never heard him preach. But no, you know what? I'm going to back off of that. I'm going to say I'll use a modern one. My
okay.
favorite person to listen to preach is the late Dr. R.C. Sproul. I've
Mm,
listened to him preach probably more than anyone, and I just want to preach as well as to
yeah.
communicate truth as well
Yeah.
as he did. Yeah.
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 He was fantastic and got better with age.
Yes. Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Um, favorite? Do you have a favorite quote that you know off the top of your head from church history?
Unless I am convinced by Scripture and reason, and not by popes and councils who have often contradicted each other, my conscience is captive to the word of God. For to go
Mm,
against conscience is neither right nor safe. Therefore, I cannot and I will not recant. God help me. Here I stand. Amen. That is
amen.
Luther's final words to the Diet of Worms.
What is your favorite period in church history?
Uh, I Probably the Reformation period.
Do you think there's a most underrated figure in church history?
Goodness.
That's a
You
hard
know,
one. I don't even know if that's you can answer that.
I haven't done a lot of study on him, but I used to have an elder. I'm gonna have to appeal to one of my other elders. He used to talk about Savonarola a lot, and I have not done enough study on him to say, but I know that he thought that he was very underrated. But
Okay.
Savonarola during the Reformation. Yeah.
Favorite work or book associated with a historical figure?
It would be a tie probably between Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God
Mm,
by Edwards, which is a sermon, and Luther's The Bondage of the Will.
mm. Keith, thank you so much for your time, brother. Do you have any closing final words before we close up here? This has been I love talking about this stuff,
Sure.
and I can tell that you really enjoy these things as well. So I just want to say thank you so much. I don't want to take more of your time, but thank you so much for being a part of this.
Absolutely, and thank you, and again, I just encourage people to learn all you can and study all you can, and also encourage your pastors
Hmm.
as you're learning things. Most pastors don't have people to talk to about these things, so
Yeah.
go to them and say, I'm loving learning these things, and can we talk about them?
Mm,
And you'll find that you may make a good friend of your pastor without even realizing it. So
that is great advice. That is great advice. To our listeners, thank you for joining us for this conversation on this important topic. Go out and try to learn something about church history today. Find a figure and do some research on them. Pick up an easy, modern, readable book about somebody or something they've done. Try to be edified by the work of God and others throughout history. If this conversation has resonated with any of you who are listening, we'd love for you to join us in this work. You can connect with us at christianheritagecenter.us. If you want to learn more, find more content or information, we have an upcoming online fellowship December 9th, I believe, on the evangelistic preaching of Martin Lloyd Jones. That's online. That'll be recorded. So we'd encourage you to go and sign up, register for that. Until next time, friends, let's continue to honor, preserve, and learn from the heritage of godly figures in the past to better serve the church today. Keith, thanks so much for being here. To our listeners, blessings.